I never thought I'd let anyone slap handcuffs on me in my own front yard. But last week, that's exactly what happened. Two men in rented uniforms, bad copies of real officers, marched at my porch, rattled off words that sound official, and snapped cheap steel around my wrists. Behind them, the neighborhood self-appointed president, Karen Van Fleet, grinned like she'd just conquered a kingdom. To anyone watching, it looked like I was just another neighbor brought down by the weight of community bylaws. To me, it was almost funny, because my actual job, I investigate fake HOAs, forged liens, and counterfeit authority for a living. Karen had no idea she'd picked the one target trained to pull apart her kind of scam. But before the cuffs and the SUV, before the smug smile and the clipboard, there was peace. I just moved into the house. A quiet street shaded by old oaks, green lawns lined up like soldiers, birds singing at dawn instead of sirens, boxes still stacked high in my living room, cookie-bearing neighbors introducing themselves at the door, Duke across the street waving every morning, leaf blower roaring like background music. It was supposed to be my clean slate, my reward, my silence. Then came the first bright red sheet tucked under my wiper, violation notice. My lawn, according to Karen, was a quarter-inch too tall. $50 fine. The next day, there were two more. Trash can visible for 3 hours past pickup. Another $75. The language escalated fast. Immediate compliance. Further action pending. It was intimidation dressed in bureaucratic clothing. The kind of trick I'd seen 1,000 times. A pocket tyrant with a clipboard testing her neighbors, probing for weakness, feeding on silence. The moment our eyes met, I knew what I was dealing with. She didn't see me as a homeowner. She saw me as prey. What she didn't know, and what would be her downfall, is that I wasn't there to be intimidated. I was there to investigate. And the very second those fake cuffs clamped down on my wrists, the real case began. This wasn't about a lawn anymore. It was about authority, who gets to wield it, and what happens when someone fakes it. And Karen Van Fleet was about to learn the difference. I did something last week no state investigator ever wants to do. I let two men in rented uniforms cuff me on my own porch, while the neighborhood self-appointed president stood grinning like she had finally bagged a trophy catch. It wasn't the cuffs that burned. It wasn't even the indignity of being paraded down my walkway like some petty criminal. It was the irony, because what Karen Van Fleet didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have guessed, was that I make my living exposing people like her. I investigate phantom HOAs, counterfeit bylaws, fraudulent liens. I spend my days pulling masks off con artists who prey on decent homeowners with threats printed in bold font on cheap colored paper. And now, here she was, trying to play the same game with me. But before the cuffs, before the SUV with tinted windows, before the smug smile, there was peace. Life smelled like fresh paint and second chances. My new living room still echoed when I walked across it. Boxes were stacked like little mountain ranges along the walls, each one marked with hurried scrawls. Kitchen books, garage tools, and then one that made me laugh out loud. Old files burn. My late wife had written that label months before we packed. Her humor had always been bone dry, and she loved poking fun at my work. Those so-called burn files were nothing but commendations, affidavits, and case notes from years in the Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. Investigations into fraudulent contractors, phony debt collectors, and yes, illegitimate HOAs. To her, they were just dusty relics. To me, they were reminders of battles fought and sometimes won. I bought this house because I thought the battles were finally behind me. The street was lined with massive oak trees whose roots lifted sidewalks like old scars. The lawns glowed green, clipped neat, as if each blade of grass understood it was part of a shared choir of order and calm. Birds woke the mornings, not sirens. This was supposed to be the reward at the end of 20 years in the trenches. My grandfather used to tell me a man's home should be his castle. And the best castles, he'd add with a wink, have quiet neighbors. I was counting on that. For 3 weeks, it seemed he'd been right. I unpacked slowly, letting the place settle around me. I met Duke across the street, a big man with a belly laugh who seemed surgically attached to a leaf blower. A young couple from 2 doors down brought over a plate of still-warm cookies and nervously introduced their toddler, who stared at me like I was a stranger in a storybook. We shared small talk. I felt, for the first time in years, like just another resident in just another neighborhood. No cases, no late-night calls, no counterfeit seals taped to doors. Just life, steady and unremarkable. And then came the paper. I found it one morning tucked under the wiper of my pickup, not my state-issued vehicle, but the one I actually like to drive, an old Ford with some dents and scratches that told honest stories. The paper was bright red, the kind of color meant to scream before you even read it. At the top, in bold, angry letters, violation notice. I stood in the driveway, reading it once, then twice. According to the Oak Street Homeowners Association, my lawn was in violation of Section 4, Paragraph B of the Community Covenants. The crime? My grass was, apparently, 1/4 of an inch too tall. Fine, $50. It was signed with a flourish. Karen Van Fleet, President, Oak Street HOA. I looked down at my grass. It looked fine. I looked at Duke's across the street. Same height, same shade of green. No violation taped to his wiper. My stomach tightened with a familiar sensation. Not quite anger, more like recognition. I've seen the move 1,000 times. Someone with too much time and too little authority invents a rule, prints it on official-looking paper, and slaps it onto the nearest neighbor's life. It's not about lawns or trash cans or mailboxes. It's about control. It's about feeding an ego starved of meaning. I folded the notice and slid it into my pocket. I told myself I'd ignore it. After all, it was my day off. Maybe Karen was just an overzealous volunteer, the type who believes clipboards equal power. I wanted to enjoy being just a guy with a new house, not an investigator with a nose for scams. The next morning proved me wrong. 2 more notices were waiting, one again for the lawn, the other for a trash can left visible from the street 3 hours past pickup. Another $75 added to the tally. The wording this time was sharper. Immediate compliance required and further action pending. The language of intimidation, designed to frighten someone who doesn't know better. Someone who believes a red sheet on a windshield is law incarnate. I stood on the curb rereading the words, and I thought of my grandfather again. He called people like this pocket tyrants. Small souls with loud voices, confusing noise for strength. And he always told me the same thing. You don't let a weed spread in your garden. You pull up by the roots, fast and clean. When I looked up from the notice, I saw her, a woman walking a yapping little dog paws in front of my house. She held a clipboard. She studied my yard like it was a crime scene. Her features were sharp, her haircut severe, so straight you could have used it to hang a picture. She scribbled something, then looked up, our eyes locked. She didn't smile. She gave me a look I recognized instantly, the smug satisfaction of someone who believes they're untouchable. That was the first time I saw Karen Van Fleet in the flesh. And in that moment, the peace I had bought, the quiet mornings, the second chance, shifted into something else entirely. The neighborhood no longer felt open. It felt occupied. The red papers weren't about grass or garbage. They were probes, tests of how far she could push before anyone pushed back. And now she knew I'd been marked. What she didn't know was that she'd picked the one man on this block, trained to see through her kind of game. She thought she was tightening a leash. In reality, she was walking straight into a trap of her own design. Because this wasn't about $50. It wasn't even about a lawn. This was about fraud, intimidation, and illusion of authority. And when people like Karen try to turn neighbors into subjects, I don't just answer with compliance. I answer with the law. The county clerk's office doesn't try to impress anyone. It's not marble halls and polished brass like you'd see in a courthouse. It's the other kind of government building, practical, worn, half-forgotten. The kind where the paint peels in thin strips near the baseboards and the ceiling tiles are just a shade too yellow to still be called white. But there's still something about it that makes me breathe easier. The air smells of paper and dust, the faintest whiff of ink that never quite leaves no matter how many years go by. Filing cabinets line the walls like tired sentries. The sound of shoes on the linoleum echoes a little too loudly, and every conversation carries further than it should. It's a building that doesn't deal in theatrics. It deals in records, in facts. And I've always liked facts. They're stubborn. They don't bend to ego or intimidation. They outlast every bully. I walked up to the counter, a stack of manila folders teetering beside the woman behind it. Her glasses dangled from a silver chain, and she looked up at me the way only a clerk can, measured, weary, but with a kind of patience that says, "I've seen it all before." "Can I help you?" she asked, voice flat from decades of repetition. "Yes, ma'am," I said, resting my palms lightly on the counter. "I'd like to see the incorporation papers and recorded covenants for the Oak Street Homeowners Association." She nodded once, adjusted her glasses, and began typing into her computer. Her fingers moved slowly, deliberately, the kind of cadence that told me she didn't miss details. I liked that. A few moments later, her brow furrowed. She typed again, and again. Finally, she let out a sigh that seemed to come from deep in her bones. "There's no record," she said. "None at all." I asked. She shook her head. "Not by that name. Not in this county." I leaned forward a little. "Could you check variations? Oak Street Community Association, Oak Street Neighbors, anything like that?" She obliged, fingers clicking at the keys, screen flickering reflections in her glasses. Another pause. Another sigh. "Nothing," she said again, this time more firmly. "No registered HOA for that subdivision. Ever. Zoned single-family residential back in the 70s. No covenants filed with the plat." I nodded, though it wasn't surprise that filled me. It was confirmation. Expecting something and proving it are two very different things, and right now, I had proof. "I'll need a certified letter," I said. "Official search conducted. No homeowners association exists under that name or any variation." A flicker of a smile ghosted across her face, the kind of humorless acknowledgement only a clerk could muster. $25 a copy, seal and notarization included. "I'll take 2, I said without hesitation. She disappeared into the back room, and I stood there in the hush of the office, letting the weight of it settle. Heavy paper, heavier truth, the kind you could put in front of a judge without fear of it cracking under pressure. But I knew better than to march straight to Karen's door with it. People like her don't quit when you swat their hand. They just switch hands. They reinvent, rename, rebrand. They count on fear outlasting truth. If I wanted this to end, really end, I had to let her keep playing. I had to give her rope, enough to make her own noose. By the time I left with my 2 crisp documents, embossed seals still warm from the press, the plan had already begun to form. Back home, the house no longer felt like the sanctuary I'd bought. It felt like a staging ground. My quiet living room turned into a tactical space. First came the cameras. Small, discreet, exterior units I collected over the years for work. Perfectly legal, perfectly hidden. I wired them into my private server, encrypted, each one capable of streaming in real time if the situation demanded it. I tested angles, porch, driveway, street line. Coverage tight enough to catch a license plate at 50 feet, subtle enough to look like ordinary security gear. Then came the microphone, a small device, not bigger than a shirt button. High fidelity, sensitive enough to catch a whisper across a room. I swapped it for one of the buttons on my favorite casual shirt. I tested it in the kitchen, speaking in a low voice, walking into the living room. When I played it back, the audio was crystal clear. Refrigerator hum, clock ticking, my voice steady. Perfect. The last piece of gear I laid on the table was a ring. Simple, black, the kind of accessory anyone might wear without drawing notice. But hidden in its design was a function. 2 taps with my thumb, and it sent an encrypted, high-priority alert. That alert would ping Lieutenant Danny Reyes, my best ally, sharp as a scalpel, calm under pressure. It would light up her service phone and her personal phone. No ignoring it. The signal would also activate live feeds, and the cameras and the button mic Reyes would see and hear everything in real time without ever setting foot on Oak Street. I slipped the ring onto my finger, felt its weight. It wasn't heavy, but the responsibility was. Next came the people. I called Boone, ex-military, now one of the sturdiest drivers I'd ever worked with. Be on standby, I told him. Unofficial. If Reyes calls, you move. No questions. Boone simply said, "Yes, sir." That was all I needed. Then I called two neighbors. The young couple with the cookies, Duke with his eternal leaf blower. I kept it simple. If you see anything happening at my place, commotion, uniforms, whatever, would you mind filming from your window? Just for my records. The couple hesitated. Fear lingered in their voices, but they agreed. They were the kind of people Karen preyed on. Polite, quiet, unwilling to stir the water. Exactly why I needed them involved. Duke, on the other hand, laughed so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "That woman's a piece of work," he said. "She fined me once because my gnome didn't comply with community aesthetic standards. Don't worry, I'll be watching." By the time the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the lawn, everything was in place. Cameras, microphone, panic ring, neighbors, Boone, Reyes, and then it came right on schedule. Another notice, slapped at my door with the subtlety of a brick. Failure to comply. Fine increased to $500. Threat of lien. Legal action pending. It was all nonsense. All bluff. A forged notice has no teeth in any court, but fear doesn't need teeth. It only needs the appearance of them. That's what she was counting on. That's what she thought she'd built her kingdom upon. I peeled it off, crumpled in my fist, and tossed it into the trash. I wasn't on defense anymore. Now I was waiting. At exactly 10 o'clock, the quiet of the street cracked. A dark SUV with tinted windows rolled up to the curb in front of my house, idling with the kind of force menace that only people pretending at authority believe in. The vehicle itself was all bravado, oversized, shiny. Aggressive lines meant to project intimidation, but the lack of official markings told me everything I needed to know. Real law enforcement doesn't need to hide behind theatrics. Pretenders do. The doors opened almost in sync, like they had rehearsed it. Two men stepped out. Their uniforms were close, but not close enough. The navy shirts were pressed, the shields polished, the patches sewn in place. To a neighbor glancing from a window, it might have looked convincing. But to me, to someone who'd worked shoulder to shoulder with real officers for decades, it was wrong from the very first detail. Their movements lacked the easy confidence of trained law enforcement. They moved stiffly, like actors still unsure of their lines. Their gun belts sat heavy on their hips, ill-adjusted, rental shop cheap. And then came Karen Van Fleet. She slid out from passenger side, clipboard in hand like it was a royal decree, blazer tailored in a shade of smug. Her chin tilted upward, her lips curved into that self-satisfied grin I'd seen before. The look of someone who thought they had won the game before it even started. I kept my own face neutral as they strode up my driveway. A little confusion, a little concern, just the right dose of citizen bewilderment. Let them think I was exactly what they wanted me to be, a compliant victim. One of the men, the bigger of the two, pounded on the door. Not a knock, no, too practiced, too heavy. It was an announcement of power. I opened it slowly, keeping my posture open and harmless. "Mark Ryland?" he barked, puffing his chest. "That's me," I said, tone even. "We have a warrant for your arrest." He held out a sheet of paper, like it was gospel. I took it, let my eyes skim across the page. It was a masterpiece of forgery in the most laughable sense. An old court seal lifted off the internet. A judge's name I knew for a fact had retired years ago. Charges that didn't exist anywhere in the legal code. Criminal defiance of community bylaws. It read like a parody of real law. "This seems a little extreme," I said lightly. "For grass?" Karen stepped forward, clipboard tucked tight to her chest, eyes gleaming. "You were warned," she said, voice sharp as glass. "We don't tolerate lawbreakers on Oak Street. You brought this on yourself." I raised my hand slowly, palms out. "No trouble," I said. "I'll comply." Relief flickered across their faces. They had been braced for resistance. Anger, shouting, maybe even a scuffle. Compliance disarmed them in ways they weren't prepared for. That was my opening. The bigger one yanked my arm behind me. fumbling with a pair of cheap steel cuffs. They bit into my wrist with unnecessary force. His attempt at dominance. I didn't flinch. My focus was elsewhere. As they turned me toward the SUV, I stumbled, an intentional clumsiness, a misstep that let my cuffed hands brush against the bumper. Between my fingers, palms since before they arrived, was a small magnetic disc no bigger than a coin. The tracker snapped into place with a whisper of metal against metal. My balance returned, and I let them guide me forward. Inside, I tapped the ring on my finger. 1, 2, a subtle motion, invisible to pretenders, but enough to send an encrypted signal across the city. Miles away, Lieutenant Danny Reyes' phones would be lighting up. Service line, personal line, both screaming. On her screens, the feeds from my cameras would already be streaming live. My voice, my cuffs, their threats, every second of it captured in real time. The SUV pulled away from the curb. The two men settled in the front seats, Karen staying behind to savor the public humiliation of the rest. Their job was to follow through. They drove in silence for the first few blocks, the city sliding past in the tinted blur of the windows. The smaller one finally turned, smug grin plastered on his face. Not so tough now, are you? Should have just paid the fine. I didn't answer. Silence is a weapon, and I wielded it carefully. They merged onto a straighter stretch of road, heading toward the industrial park on the outskirts of town. Long sight lines, low traffic. A perfect place for what they thought was intimidation, and what I knew was interception. As we rolled deeper into the industrial district, the driver muttered into his phone, "Yeah, we got him. No problem. Heading to the spot now." Reporting in. To Karen, no doubt. Conspiracy confirmed. The passenger leaned closer, voice dropping. "Here's how this works. You're going to pay up, and you're going to keep your mouth shut, because we know where you live." The words were sharp, but what mattered wasn't the threat itself. It was that my button mic caught every syllable. Admissible, undeniable, felony extortion, impersonation, and kidnapping all wrapped up in a single sentence. Good. I thought silently. Say more. And then the world shifted. A battered construction van lumbered out from a side street ahead of us, crawling slow. Our driver cursed, easing off the gas. Behind us, a black sedan closed the gap, hugging our bumper tight. To the left, a dark pickup truck slid smoothly into the adjacent lane. Boom. I recognized the steady hands on the wheel even through tinted glass. The driver stiffened, instincts kicking in, but it was already too late. The van braked hard. Tires screeched. The SUV jolted forward, seatbelt cutting into my chest. The black sedan behind us sealed the trap, bumper kissing ours. Boone's pickup swerved left, boxing us in. In 2 seconds flat, we were immobilized, and then came the thunder. Doors of surrounding vehicles flew open. Real police this time. Tactical vests, service weapons, trained economy of motion. Shouts erupted from every angle, a cascade of overlapping commands designed to overwhelm. Police, show me your hands. Don't move. Hands where I can see them now. The two men in the front froze, panic spreading like cracks in glass. Their tough guy facade shattered under the weight of real authority. The driver lifted trembling hands onto the dashboard. The passenger did the same, face pale, sweat glistening at his temples. The back doors of the SUV yanked open. Strong hands pulled me free, unlocking the cheap cuffs with practiced ease. "You okay, sir?" a young officer asked, eyes steady. "Fine," I said, rubbing circulation back into my wrists. "Now get them." They did. The two counterfeit officers were dragged from the SUV, pressed face first onto hood, cuffed with steel that wouldn't break under pressure. Their rights were read in the cadence of people who actually knew the law. The peel back began almost immediately. In the glove compartment, a neat stack of red violation notices, identical to the ones plastered to my truck. Blank spaces waiting to be filled with bogus infractions and inflated fines. Under the passenger seat, a binder of neighborhood maps, crude circles drawn around select homes. My house, marked in angry red ink. In the rear, a lockbox popped open with a pry bar. Inside, several dozen fake police badges, cheap metal gleaming under the afternoon sun, wads of rubber-banded cash, each bundle labeled with an address, each sticky note an IOU of intimidation. Boone counted quickly. Over $5,000, Chief. And in the driver's door pocket, the real prize, a cheap prepaid phone, batteries still warm, screen blinking with a new message from K-Boss. I took the phone, read the text. Is it done? Is the trash taken out? My lips curled into a smile. The arrogance of it, the assumption that her empire would keep running unchallenged. But now the mask was off. Karen's little HOA wasn't an annoyance anymore. It was a criminal enterprise. And thanks to her overconfidence, I had every piece I needed to bring the whole thing crashing down. The keys rattled lightly in the evidence bag, innocuous enough. But to me, they were the sound of the whole case breaking wide open. One brass tag stamped with Stoico Self-Storage 218. Boone held it up between two fingers, and we both knew what it meant. People don't keep their best secrets in their homes. They stash them where they think no one will ever look. The warrant came through faster than expected. The judge had read our affidavits, seen the burner phone logs, the fake citations, the counterfeit badges, and signed without hesitation. Within an hour, Boone and I were pulling to the gates of Stoico Self-Storage, headlights sweeping across row after row of corrugated metal doors painted in the same chipped orange and blue. Unit 218 sat halfway down the row. The air around it smelled faintly of dust and motor oil, the kind of scent every storage facility seems to absorb. Boone slid the key into the padlock. It turned clean, like it had been used just that morning. When the door rolled up, the stale air hit us like the breath of a long-closed tomb. Inside wasn't furniture or forgotten family heirlooms. It was an office. Along the left wall stood filing cabinets, each drawer neatly labeled in black marker: Oak Street, Willow Creek, Pine Ridge, Maple Lane. Karen's empire was broader than we'd imagined. Every drawer meant dozens of victims, dozens of families harassed into compliance with her imaginary laws. We started opening drawers. Inside each were neatly organized folders, homeowner names, property tax lookups, copies of personal checks, even printouts of online payment confirmations. My own file sat right at the front of the Oak Street drawer. Inside were the red notices I'd already received, carefully duplicated and time-stamped. Behind mine were files on neighbors who had since moved away, each with checks clipped to the folders, evidence of money extracted through fear. Against the opposite wall stood a commercial-grade printer, boxes of pre-cut bright red stock stacked high beside it. This was her factory, the guts of the con. Next to the printer sat reams of counterfeit templates, forged county letterhead, mock lien documents, even scanned court orders with a judge's signature photocopied so many times the ink bled. It was bold, reckless, and chillingly effective. Enterprise established. Back at headquarters, a financial warrant peeled open the last layer. Two of her shell LLC accounts carried just enough cash to look legitimate. The third, though, was different, bloated with deposits that matched the checks in the storage files. $250,000. All siphoned from homeowners who thought they were paying off legal fines when really they were funding her little kingdom. And then came the burner phone, cracked open by our tech team. Inside, a calendar entry jumped out. Board meeting garage tonight. We had her. By dusk, we were staged under the canopy of oaks that lined her street. Porch lights flickered on one by one as the neighborhood settled into its evening rhythm. To the casual eye, nothing was out of place. But to us, every shadow had movement. Unmarked cars sat at either end of the block. Plainclothes officers waited in backyards. Boone and I crouched low behind Duke's fence, our vantage point angled straight toward Karen's garage. Through the directional mic, her voice bled into my earpiece. Sharp, angry, unacceptable, she snapped. He was supposed to be handled. Now he's vanished, and so have my employees. This reflects poorly on our organization. Our organization. The delusion of it struck me again. She wasn't just a con artist. She was a self-crowned monarch ruling over a paper kingdom. Inside the garage, we could make out her board. Two nervous neighbors seated at a folding table, nodding as Karen paced. They looked less like co-conspirators and more like captives who'd learned it was safer to agree than resist. All units in place, Reyes whispered in my ear from the command car. No exits uncovered. On your go, Chief. I nodded to Boone. He adjusted the strap of his vest, eyes steady. 4 of us would go into the side door, others covering the front and back. I wrapped my hand around the knob, felt the cool metal under my palm, and exhaled slowly. Now! The door swung wide with a violent shove. Police? Nobody move. My voice cut through the garage like a blade. The scene froze. Karen at her podium, clipboard in hand. The 2 board members stiff in their chairs, eyes wide with panic. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Karen did. She shoved the podium sideways and bolted for the interior door, shrieking. Boone was faster. He planted himself in her path like an oak tree come to life. She collided with his chest, rebounded, and tried to dart past, but Boone caught her arm with an iron grip. She kicked, clawed, spat, fury burning in her eyes, but she wasn't going anywhere. I stepped forward, cuffs in hand. Karen Van Fleet, I said, my voice steady, carrying across the garage. You are under arrest for extortion, conspiracy, racketeering, criminal impersonation, and forging a government seal. Click. 1 cuff snapped onto her wrist. Click. The second locked home. The Queen was caged. Around us, porch lights blinked on. Curtains twitched. Neighbors, drawn by the commotion, stepped onto porches. For months they had been subjects in Karen's pretend kingdom, ruled by her threats and red paper. Now they watched as she was let out in real cuffs, past real officers, into the back of a real cruiser. Her eyes still burned with defiance. You can't do this, she hissed at me. I'll sue. I'll ruin you. You'll regret ever crossing me. I met her glare, unblinking. You can tell it to the judge. The cruiser door shut with a final metallic thud, the sound of her power ending. As the blue and red lights washed across the street, the neighborhood exhaled. The weight was gone. The Queen of Red paper was finished, and Oak Street was free again. Everything moved fast after the arrest, the way it always does once momentum tips in your favor. The lab techs tore through the evidence with methodical precision. Every phone extraction, every printed red notice, every legend note was cataloged, time-stamped, and preserved. The tracker data from the SUV lined up perfectly with my own microphone recordings and the neighbors' videos. From 3 different angles, the story was the same: intimidation, impersonation, extortion. The mountain of evidence grew taller by the hour. Her 2 hired men folded quickly. Faced with video of the fake arrest, the burner phone records, and the lockbox full of counterfeit badges, they had nowhere to go. One pled out on a federal firearms charge. Serial number filed off a handgun tucked under his seat, stacked with state counts for kidnapping and impersonating an officer. The other followed suit. They were young enough to understand what 30 years in a cell meant and smart enough to grab the deals offered. They became footnotes, tools in Karen's empire who crumbled as soon as the spotlight hit. Karen fought. She hired attorneys who tried every trick in the book. Motions to dismiss, cries of selective enforcement, claims that she had been running nothing more than a voluntary community organization. The paper trail buried those arguments before they ever reached the jury. The forged county letterhead, the fake liens, the bank accounts fat with deposits, all of it laid bare the truth. When her day in court came, the room was packed. Victims from Oak Street and Willow Creek filled the benches, some clutching copies of the fake notices she'd plastered to their doors. Others just came to see the woman who had bullied them for months stand before a judge who would not be intimidated. The judge's words were sharp, each one falling like a hammer. He called it a campaign of intimidation against their own neighbors. He spoke of trust, of community, of the damage done when fear is used as a weapon inside the very streets people are supposed to feel safe in. And then he handed down the sentence. 15 years in federal custody, 3 years supervised release, a permanent injunction forbidding her from ever serving in any HOA board or property management role, full forfeiture, cash, commercial printer, SUV, every shell company account, restitution ordered and already rolling, checks being cut to families who had paid her fraudulent fines, liens voided, names cleared. Karen didn't flinch until the marshals led her away. Only then did she twist around to glare at the gallery, defiance burning in her eyes. But it didn't matter anymore. The paper kingdom she built had been dismantled sheet by sheet, until nothing remained but evidence bags and court transcripts. The ripple effect was immediate. The hotline we set up for victims lit up within hours of the verdict. Call after call poured in, some from our county, some from neighboring towns. 2 copycat associations collapsed within days, their so-called presidents disappearing into the shadows once they realized the law was looking. Others tried to shred files, but was too late. When fraud runs on paper, it leaves a trail, and we had learned to follow it. A month later, life on Oak Street felt like it had been scrubbed clean. I sat on my porch with a mug of coffee, the sun warming the rail beneath my arm. Duke was across the street, pushing his mower in steady rows, pausing only to wave with a grin. Kids zipped past on scooters, their laughter carrying down the block. For the first time since moving in, the quiet I'd hoped for had returned. Not the hollow hush of neighbors silenced by fear, but the real kind. The kind you earn when paper and witnesses meet the law head-on. Inside my office at the Attorney General's building, I keep a small display case on the corner of my desk. Inside sits one of Karen's 10 badges, pulled from the lockbox. It looks convincing at a glance, but up close it's nothing but cheap metal with a stamped crest. I had it mounted behind glass, labeled training exhibit. We use it now in workshops. How to spot fakes, how to record video that stands up in court, how to build airtight cases. It's a reminder to every young investigator that authority isn't a costume, it's a trust. Karen had tried to rule with colored paper and intimidation. She tried to crown herself queen of cul-de-sacs with nothing more than a printer and the arrogance to believe her neighbors wouldn't fight back. And for a while, she was right, until the day she picked the wrong porch, the wrong driveway, the wrong man. What she never understood is that patience is its own weapon. You don't need to shout when the truth is on your side. You just need to gather it, stack it, and wait until the lie collapses under its own weight. Now, every time I walk the block and hear Duke's laugh, or see the young couple 2 doors down sitting on their porch with their toddler, I know the fence line is clear again. The neighborhood feels open, unoccupied. And if anyone tries to play that game here again, fake boards, counterfeit bylaws, red paper threats, they won't find silence. They'll find me,